When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So said Sherlock Holmes in The Sign of Four. Holmes is arguably the most well-known literary character ever written, and no doubt you know his creator was Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle. Doyle has an association with many places in Britain, one of which being the New Forest. Doyle died on the 7th of July 1930. 4 days later, he was buried in the rose garden of his Sussex home. However, 25 years after his death, his body was exhumed, brought to the New Forest, and reinterred in the graveyard of All Saints' Church, Minstead. Doyle was an intriguing character, and there are many rumours as to why he was brought here. Some say his connection with the New Forest was more spiritual than physical. Certainly, the ancient oak tree which leans over his grave has twice been struck by lightning. In this episode, I'm heading out to find out more about Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle and work out why his body was moved to the New Forest. I'm Andy Jones, a writer and producer. Join me as I set out to discover the unusual histories and intriguing mysteries of Great Britain. In this series, I'm visiting the New Forest in Hampshire. Episode 2. The Grave of Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle. Doyle was very fond of the New Forest. Much of the inspiration for his novel The White Company came from a visit he made here in 1889. If you ever pick up a copy of the historical adventure, you'll find a number of detailed references to places around the area. In fact, the main character, Alien Edrickson, eventually becomes the sockman, or landlord of Minstead. Many years after the novel was published, Doyle actually bought a property in Minstead. The house, called Bignell Wood, became his rural retreat. As for many people, Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle is one of my literary heroes, and one story I heard many years ago has always fascinated me. I met Jim Boyce when I was a teenager. He was a semi-retired electrician who worked for my father. Jim was a short, wiry man with a broad smile and wicked sense of humour. He was never short of a story to tell, and I was always keen to listen. Jim was a true New Forester. Born just before the Great Depression in 1929, he had a keen ambition to join the Royal Air Force. However, a physical disability prevented him from doing so. Instead, Jim trained as an electrician and worked for the Southern Electricity Board, a job that took him into every nook and cranny of the New Forest. It was while he was at work one day, sometime in the 1950s, that a peculiar incident happened to him. On this particular day, he was sent to read the electricity meter at Bignell Wood. He knew the property well and the family that then owned it. They were away at the time, and a key had been left for him. When he entered the hallway, a man was looking at him from the top of the stairs. A cheerful-looking fellow with a large moustache. Jim was surprised. The house had been locked up, and he wasn't expecting anyone to be there. "I've just come in to read the meter," explained Jim. The man made no response. Feeling a little awkward, Jim went to the cupboard under the stairs where the meter was positioned and jotted down the reading in his notebook. He came back out to find the man was no longer there. Jim assumed he must have walked away, so he shouted up the stairs, "All done. Shall I lock the door on my way out?" Jim waited for a moment, but again there was no response. He was keen to get on his way and was worried that he'd interrupted whatever the man had been doing. He left the building, locked the door, and hid the key back under the flower pot. It was a strange event that left Jim feeling uneasy. but he moved on with his rounds and didn't give it any more thought. Sometime later, he was chatting with the district nurse. Just like Jim, she spent her time visiting different properties in the area. In the course of conversation, the name of the family that lived at Bignor Wood came up, and Jim mentioned that he'd been there to read the meter. "Did you see him?" asked the nurse. "See you? Conan-Doyle. I often see him when I go up there." Whether dear old Jim was pulling my leg, I couldn't tell. He certainly told the story with enough conviction for me to believe him. So I'm heading out towards Minstead, just come off the main drag, over cattle grid, and into the narrow, twisting lanes of the forest. And very typically, there is a New Forest pony stood in the middle of the road who couldn't care less about the cars trying to pass. So I'm going to have to go round. I'll come up to a junction, or I can go left or right to Minstead. I think I'll go left. Like many places in the New Forest, Minstead is very old. There's evidence of people living here in the Stone Age, and the remains of an Iron Age hill fort not far away. Going along past a stream which is called Dog Ben Gutter. Brilliant name. Although the connection between Conan Doyle and the New Forest is very strong, I don't believe any of the original Sherlock Holmes stories were ever set here. It's a pity, as the ancient woodland would have made a terrific backdrop for some complex crime. And there are certainly a number of interesting places for an agent of Moriarty to hide out in. Well, I've arrived in the village of Minstead. Very typical little English village. Quite a few houses all dotted around a crossroads here. It's got a nice village green and a pub called the Trusty Servant, a war memorial in the centre, and a Union Jack flying. It's even got a set of old sort of replica stocks on the village green, which are quite amusing. It's got a padlock on it. I'm not sure if they get used today. Maybe the parish council use them if you use the wrong recycling bin or something like that. And it's even got a cottage called Wisteria Cottage. I think every British village has a Wisteria Cottage. Now I want to find the church, which I believe is up this track here. There's an old stone plaque on the right hand side here. Minstead Technical School. Victorian Technical School. I think, God, a weird place to have a technical school in Victorian times. Interestingly, the name Minstead actually comes from the Old English mint place, and it was given that name because of the amount of mint that grew around here. I can't see any growing today, but then it is the middle of January and everything's dead. Here's the church. There's a huge great oak tree over the Lich Gate. And the church is actually quite different from a lot of churches you see around this area. It looks almost like a cottage with a square tower put on the side and a weather vane at the top. I think it's very, very old. Let's come through the Lich Gate, the parish of All Saints, Minstead in the Diocese of Winchester. Right. So I'm in the graveyard now. Tell you what, for a small church and for a small village, it's a very, very packed graveyard. There's quite a few old tombs. I think these are quite old. No, 1909, 1901. They look older than I thought they were. There's a sort of mausoleum type thing in the corner. And as I walk around, oh, that's interesting. There's a name here, Purkis. And of course, if you listen to the first episode of this podcast, you'll remember that Purkis was the name of one of the people who found the body of King Rufus and took it to Winchester in 1100. Now, I don't think this could be the same person. This person died in 1833, so I don't think it could be the same Purkis, otherwise he'd have been about 800 years old. But Purkis is a very old New Forest name, obviously. Now, I think I want to get to the south side of the church if I come around here. My goodness me, there are even more graves around here. Blimey. And hello, there's an oak tree there. Is that the one? There's two what look like two oak trees, but oh no, this is the one. This is what I want. And yeah, there we go. Right underneath the oak tree is the grave of Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle. It's a very peaceful, lovely place to be buried. Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle. Steel true, blade straight. Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle, Knight. Patriot, physician, and man of letters. 22nd of May, 1859 to the 7th of July, 1930. And his beloved, his wife, there's a comma, and his beloved, his wife, Jean Conan-Doyle, and her dates of death and birth. Now, what's quite sweet is I think a lot of people make a sort of pilgrimage here to see the grave of the great man, and they left quite a few tokens. There's a lovely magnifying glass that's been left here, a plastic meerschaum pipe, a couple of badges, a lot of stones that people put on here, another pipe round the back, and a little figurine of Sherlock Holmes playing the violin, and Dr. Watson sat in his chair. Wonderful. So, now I've found the grave, I still wonder why the body was brought here after it had already been buried in Sussex. So I've just crept into the church. It's very interesting. It's not like other churches where they've got a centre aisle and an altar at the end. It's sort of L-shaped, but it's all sort of set on different levels. And there's a real sense of, real feeling of being quite old, this church. I can imagine Conan Doyle coming here when he stayed here locally, when he was writing The White Company. Some of this architecture, especially around the door, I mean, that looks from the kind of period that he was writing about. Well, after coming all this way, it'd be rude not to visit the pub. It's a very quaint little pub inside, very cosy. There's a lovely fire in the corner at the moment, which is nice and warm. I'm not sure if Conan Doyle ever frequented this pub, but it's definitely the kind of place I imagine Holmes and Watson might have stayed at while investigating some crime.
But how do you know about them?
Elementary, my dear Watson. This man has been dead for at least 2 hours.
That's Basil Rathbone in his dynamic take on Sherlock Holmes. Here's a fun fact. Holmes never says elementary, my dear Watson, in any of the novels. It actually comes from a later stage adaptation. Conan Doyle's real life was as fascinating as some of the fictitious stories he created. He is primarily known as an author, but he was also a physician, an adventurer, a campaigner, a keen sportsman, and of all things, a spiritualist. Believing that the dead can communicate with the living may be considered somewhat odd for a man who was trained in medicine and introduced the world to the science of deduction. But in his later life, he became an outspoken proponent of spiritualism. He wrote articles on the subject, attended seances, and believed that his wife could channel spirits. He even opened a bookshop dedicated to spiritualism. Amusingly, the telegram address was Ectoplasm Sower. No doubt these activities gave rise to some of the rumours around Minstead and Bignell Wood, his house. Bignell Wood is still a private dwelling, but a quick bit of Googling brings up a fair bit of information on the house. This is interesting. On the New Forest National Park website, it's got a short article about Doyle and Bignell Wood. It says, Conan Doyle turned to spiritualism following the deaths of several close family members around the time of the First World War. Well, actually, I don't know that that's true, because Doyle had been interested in spiritualism well before that. In fact, going back to the 1890s, I think. It goes on, though. It says, the Bignell Wood was used to hold seances, and that the local postman refused to deliver mail to the door. Oh, goodness. How interesting. Also that Charles Dickens and Joseph Conrad came through to Conan Doyle to ask him to complete their unfinished works. That's interesting, isn't it? I love the way that when people come through from the afterlife, they ask sort of quite big questions. It sounds like quite a task to be given. It's not like they've come through and asked him to complete their tax return, or had they left the gas on. Interesting that the local postman was unsettled by the house, a bit like Jim going to read the meter. When Bignell Wood came up for sale in 2022, a series of articles were published on the house. So this is the BBC article on Bignell Woods. There are some pictures and a video. So that's what it looks like. Well, that's what it now looks like inside. I wonder how different it would have been when dear old Jim read the meter in there. Definitely a very nice house. 8 bedrooms, 6 acres of land. Good value at £3 million they wanted for it. I wonder if they threw in a free Ouija board. Let's have a look at the video. It's a typical real estate video. A sort of drone shot outside or whatever it is coming down. So the owner is explaining how she restored the house. It looks nice. Okay. Wow. Whoa. Hold on. So the owner of the house has just described how she believes the house is haunted. And she puts that down to Sir Arthur holding seances there. But she goes on to say that a former resident saw the author's ghost in her room. She said she was aware of someone in her room. He was very big and apologising for being there, but he was looking for his diary. Wow, that's a bit chilling. Was this the man that Jim and the district nurse had seen at Bignell Wood? The descriptions are similar. And what of the diary he was looking for? I wonder if he ever found it. So much has been written about Doyle, it's hard to separate the facts from rumour. I was still unclear as to why his body was moved here. However, in the church I picked up an information leaflet written by Michael Clark. So this might be the answer to our questions. It's called a little leaflet called Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle and the Minstead Connection. In 1925, Sir Arthur Conan-Doyle bought a house. Kind of interesting information there. Sir Arthur died on the 7th of July 1930. He was buried in his garden at Windlesham. We know that. Oh, right. Okay, so his wife, Lady Jean, she expressed a wish to be buried in the churchyard at Minstead, and that Sir Arthur's remains being reinterred with hers. But when she died in 1940, there were difficulties in obtaining the necessary permission to exhume the body because of the war, and she was buried near Sir Arthur at Windlesham. Oh, right. Okay, so it was his wife, Lady Jane, who actually wanted to be buried at Minstead. Right, so that's why they waited until 1955, because they couldn't get the paperwork during the war. Oh, and it also goes on to say that Charlie Whitehorn, villager, helped his father Jack dig the grave at Minstead. It sounds a bit grim. And in June 2009, he gave me the following information. Oh, and there's an account here of the gravedigger who dug that grave. It says the rector and church wardens had decided on the location at the far side of the churchyard because they thought that the villagers might get upset if, not being a Christian, Sir Arthur was buried in the normal rotation amongst their Christian relatives. Oh, so it was still in 1955 an issue, that the fact that he was a spiritualist or had converted to spiritualism. How interesting. So that solves a mystery as to why his body was brought here. It's a capital mistake to theorise before one has data. One begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of the theories to suit facts. Another great Sherlock Holmes quote. I now understand why Doyle's body was moved here. He and his wife were obviously fond of Minstead. Maybe his spirit does haunt the area. And what about that great oak tree? Was it struck by lightning? Probably. But then, it is a tall tree on top of a hill. been a pleasure to share this story with you. If you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe to the podcast and maybe share it with your friends. In the next episode, I'll be investigating a group of witches that may or may not have saved Britain during the Second World War. To find out more about me and my writing, you can find me on social media or via my website, ajonesauthor.com. This podcast was written and presented by Andy Jones and is a Copia production.